Hey, it's Jessica Anthony. This week's video, I am going over how I made a quilt for my daughter. There were several steps. First, just choosing the size, and I'm just diving into the steps so you get an overview, and then I'll show you everything I did. So, choosing the size of the quilt, I did twin, somewhere between twin and full size quilt size. Choosing how I want the quilt to look, I just did squares, 7x7 squares, kept it easy for myself. Choosing your fabric, and that includes for the back of the fabric as well. And once I cut out all the quilt squares, I laid it out how I wanted to lay it out. Sewed first the rows together, and then sewed all the rows together. So it's sewing all one row, the next row, and then once all the rows were sewed, sewing those together. How many times can I do this? So sew up the backing, sew up the iron the binding, sew the binding to the front of the quilt that is now all sewed together, and then sandwich those three, the backing, the batting, and the front of the quilt. Pin that in place, do your quilting on top, so however pattern you want on top. I did some diagonals in both directions, trim as needed the batting, and I hand sewed then the binding to the back of the quilt. Those are the major steps, and so we'll dive into each of them. And I've already got some squares cut out. It's 7.5 inches by 7.5 inches squared. So I took a big piece of fabric, I don't know if this is the proper way, and I folded it, and then I actually created strips at 7.5 inches. Now I'm going to cut up each of these strips into the squares. Maybe more experienced quilters can let me know if this is like not a great way. What are techniques you use to streamline? Maybe it's not about streamlining anyway. It's just about enjoying the meditation of cutting out each square and then piecing them together. I got the first 30 or so squares cut out. And the fun part is seeing these piles of squares growing. Quilt squares are cut, so now to arrange. We've got the batting here, so I'll spread that out and see how I want to do this. Okay, so now that I have all my rows planned out, I am ready to start sewing together the squares. So we'll sew squares together in each of the rows, and then sew the rows together, stacking them on top of each other. So here goes. I don't know why I made the seam allowance. I should have done 3/8 of an inch, but I didn't. So then I cut this one out to be the actual 7x7 square. And for my first squares, I just marked the corners on the fabric here. I marked the corners with the pattern piece and then pinned them because they're not all perfectly square. I'm going to try and not have this totally lopsided as I sew it. So I will sew a 1/4 inch seam at the side of that for the start of my row. First two are sewed together. I will just rinse and repeat. I'm finding that pink corner. They may not be perfectly matched up, and putting it right at the corner, sticking it through. Then I'm finding the corner on this side. I'm sure I could be way less precise than this, but I know that if there's a bunch of slightly uneven things, it could get really wonky really quickly. What's your method? All right, sew this up. We've got one row done, so now I'll just come in here and iron all of the seams open. Neptune and Circe are down here with me. Okay, so that first row is done, and now I'll just repeat all those same steps for the rest of the rows. I now have all of my rows sewed, tied off and trimmed and ironed. Next step is assembly of all the rows. So this is actually the bottom row, not the top row. This is the second bottom. So I'm going to stack them on top of each other so that when they open, I'll match up the seams, and then all of the notches that I drew in on the corners here with the chalk, I'll also align those and kind of pin along the edge because they're on both sides of the fabric to try and keep the line going across really straight. We are pinned and ready to sew. First two rows are sewn together of the quilt, and so I'll just repeat that with the next row up, laying it on top, sewing up right sides together. Once that's done, I will press all these seams open on the back of the quilt. Row 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, assembled. Pin it, and then sew again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and pin, and sew. Adding our 6th layer on. It's all together. Now I just need to iron all the rows, tie off the ends, and then put it together with the batting in the middle and the backing. I decided this was a little too square. I'm going to add one more row to the top. And I ended up adding one more row to the top. I have 6 yards of the fabric for the back. What I'm just going to do is cut it in half. So it's 3 yards and 3 yards. Sew it up the center. Those two panels will run along that, and then I'll cut off the excess for binding the sides. But this is that halfway point, and it doesn't, since it's not exact and I'll have extra fabric, I'm not too precious about this cut. They're just about even. So now I'll take these two apart, put right sides together, right sides of the fabric together to sew, yeah, all the way up the 3 yards. And we're all pinned up. This is going to be a very long seam, so. Oh, Neptune is here to say hello. And then ironing the seam. Laid out the backing with a seam in it and the front, and now I'm just going to cut along the edge of the front. I'm going to cut the backing basically, and then I'm going to use this excess to be the binding around the side. It's a good 4 or 5 inches, so there should be plenty, and there's plenty up top to do the top and bottom. And Neptune is joining. So now I'm going to, from these strips, re-iron and measure out the binding for the sides of the quilt, and then I will sew the binding to the front of the quilt all along the four edges. I've taken one of the long strips and folding it in half to iron it. For my next step, I am measuring the whole length of the strip 2 inches for the binding and trimming so that the binding is 2 inches. And my first binding is cut. So I'll head over to the second one, and I still have to cut out the binding for the short sides. So to do this, I've configured this so it's 3/8 of an inch less, and that is where I will work on getting my folded hem to. So I'll do this all the way down and then iron all the way down, but I will meet you at the other side because that will take a very long time. I've got the 3 other bindings pinned, so I'm going to go iron them now. Now I'll be opening up the binding and pinning right sides together. I'm starting with the long side of the quilt, so I'll be pinning these all along the side of the quilt and then sewing along this fold line. And then I'll repeat that on all 4 sides. And here we have it all pinned, ready to sew up along the fold line. I have just sewn the border to one side, hemmed along the fold. So this will open. I will iron this open, and this will go around the batting. So this has been ironed so that the seam is a nice crease, and this will fold back onto the back for the binding. Now I need to pin up through all 3 layers. It's all pinned. We're going to start the quilting. I have to choose my threads. I have trimmed the batting to kind of match the edge of the fold here. I'm going to start by sewing around the edge of the whole front face to secure it to all 3 layers, and then I'll quilt through everything, and I'm planning to do this by machine. Alright, we're coming in here with quilting stitches throughout from the machine. These are my 4 thread colors for the quilting. I've already put these 3 on, and so I'm just going every other diagonal in one direction with this one. So I will continue on. I've only got a few more rows left to do. It's a lot of fabric maneuvering here. I have to tie off all of the thread from the quilting on each of the ends and then hand stitch the edge of the thing. So, very excited. Neptune, what do you think? Oh, no eating the batting, sweetie. This is trimmed, and I will fold along the fold that I ironed in before. And create the binding and do hand stitching all the way around. I think I'm going to have a lot of cat cuddles during this process. And I'm just doing the slip stitch all the way around. So for the slip stitch, I am getting under the fabric and coming up through the side about a quarter of an inch or so, and then repeating that, going through the under, moving it forward about a quarter of an inch, coming up through the binding, and just doing this all the way down. And the back is all hand sewn up. And here is the finished quilt. The trim is the same as the backing. It's stitched with 4 different color threads. 2 thread colors alternate in one direction, and then the other 2 thread colors alternate in the other direction. All the way across, so it creates little triangles. It's very cozy.